up though? It's your boy ROCO. And today I want to take a step back, and really try to cover some of the basics that you need in order to start your growing journey. So a lot of this is based off feedback that you guys gave us through a poll. So the first thing I'm going to be breaking down is when I set up a new setup, no matter where I am, the steps that I take to set up this setup. Okay? Particularly in this video, we're going to be talking about tent setups, although you can do open room. A lot of new growers that are just getting into it. I'd encourage you to test the waters, with a smaller, more manageable grow. Learn your mistakes on that size scale. And then once you're comfortable, once you can kill it in a 4x4, you move to the 4x8. Once you can kill it in the 4x8, you move to the 10x10 or open room. You just keep on gradually scaling up. There's no need to bite off more than you can chew. There's a lot of good people to help you, but really, at the end of the day, no matter how much information you have, it's going to come down to you, your dedication, your willingness to be in your garden and just get your shit done, okay? So without further ado, let's get into the video. So I broke this video into two parts, okay? Part one, I'm just going to be going through all necessary equipment you'll need in order to properly set up and maintain an environment that's apropos for your plants. If you don't know, now you know. Plants need an ideal environment, and it is slightly different for every plant, okay? Luckily for us, we live in 2025. We have access to a wealth of information on the internet, okay? One of these informative things you can access on the internet is a VPD chart. Now, be sure when you Google this, it's cannabis specific, and it's based on the stage of life your plant is in, okay? So the VPD chart is gonna be different for germination than it is veg, than it is flower, okay? And essentially, how you're going to use this chart, I'm not going to get into too many details and the science behind all VPD. Maybe that's for another video, but that's kind of dense. So how you use this chart is it will have A, temperature, and then boom, B, RH. And it'll have different ranges for ideal environments. And you can kind of see, all right, if my environment is 70 degrees and I'm in veg, where do I want my RH to fall? And there'll be a range with a little grace period of maybe 5% RH. But this is a good guideline to try to follow in order to make sure your plants are healthy, transpiring properly, aka breathing and getting that proper gas exchange. That being said, the first thing you're going to want to do when setting up a room or setting up a tent is decide on the space you want to use. Okay? So hypothetically, we're going to take a scenario where maybe you have a spare bedroom. Okay? Not a huge bedroom. Maybe the bedroom's about 10 feet by 10 feet. So this will be the space that you're going to grow in. Okay, now what I would do if I had a 10 by 10 room that I wanted to grow in, and I was just getting into this, I'd look up to purchase a tent to put in my 10 by 10 room. And I would use the 10 by 10 room as what we call in the growing world a lung room, okay? And let me break down a lung room for you really quick. Essentially what a lung room is going to have the majority of your equipment, and you're going to be controlling that lung room, its environment, okay? So the theory behind it is if you can control this larger lung room, then you can just vent air into your space, into your tent, and that will ultimately better control your tent's environment as well, making it more favorable for your plants to grow in. So back to the scenario. We got a 10 by 10 lung room. We got a 5 by 5 tent. What do we need to do now? First thing I would do, and if you need help, I'm sure there's a lot of information online about how to set up tents, or I can make a video if there's really not. But you're going to set up your 5x5, you're going to set up your 4x4, or whatever size tent you decide to grow in. So the next two items I would pick up is A, a light, and B, an intake fan, right, with some ducting. Preferably, I would say get at least a 6-inch intake fan. And the reason being is if you ever want to scale up, 6 inches is going to work. 4 inches, not going to work unless you're in a little less tent. So you might as well spend an extra $20. Get a nicer fan that can move more air and just tone back the airflow. So now we got airflow circulating regularly, right? Your lung room and your tent should be nearly the same environment. After your tent's set up, you're going to zip up your tent, you're going to close all the windows, you're going to take a temperature gauge, okay? Temperature gauge is super fucking cheap, bro. You can find them on Amazon, you can find them at hydro shops, you can find them at Walmart, you can find them pretty much anywhere. You want to make sure that when you get one of these, it tracks and reads a 24-hour period. Meaning, You can put it in your tent, you can leave it for 24 hours, you can come back, and you can see exactly if your environment dropped to 60 degrees at some point, or if your RH dropped to 40, or if your RH spiked to 80, and you can really tell what your environment is gonna do for a 24-hour period. Let's say your room is staying 80 degrees with the lights off in your long room, you're in the fucking tent, reading the temperature, 24-hour period, 80 degrees. All right, so this would immediately make me think, all right, well, when I get a light in there, I know it's gonna increase the temp. When I have plants in there, just life being in a tent is gonna increase the temp. You know what I mean? So I'd sway towards, all right, I gotta figure out how to either A, make my long room colder and vent some air from outdoors in, or B, I'm gonna have to stick some kind of AC or cooling device in my long room and then vent more air into my tent properly. The next thing we're gonna do is recheck our 24-hour highs and lows, right? But this time, we're gonna have our light set up in our tent. We're gonna be blasting it at 100%, as hot as that bitch will go. We're gonna have our temp gauge inside the tent, and then we're gonna leave it, preferably checking the highs and lows for a few days. So the reason we wanna check this without the lights on and with the lights on is because at times, depending on how hot your light is running and the size of your space and how well your ventilation is, a light can add a lot of heat to a space. And I know what you're thinking. Why would I not just check the space one time with the lights on? Why do I need to check with the lights off? Well, here's the thing about growing cannabis. In veg, yes, you can run your lights 24 hours all the time if you want to. Some people recommend it, some people don't. But more times than not, an 18 and 6 is the most common vegetative light cycle, meaning you're gonna keep your lights on for 18 hours and your lights off for 6 hours. So when your lights kick off during this time period, you're gonna wanna know if your temperature drops 20 degrees, if your humidity spikes 20%. So this is why you check your environmental conditions with the lights on and with the lights off. The theory behind checking it with your lights jacked up to 100%, although you may never actually use that much light in a grow, you want the very most extreme conditions to be shining in your tent and then you to be able to control. So then when you dial the light intensity down and there's less heat, your environment is going to be easy to control. We know our highs and lows when the lights are on. We know our highs and lows when the lights are off, okay? These are all things that you want to keep track of before you start growing, bro. So it's a process to set up something, especially if you're going to do it right. I've seen so many people that want to grow weed and they get excited and they clear out their closet and they throw some plants in there and they don't have a temp gauge. They have no idea what the environment's doing. They just have all kinds of problems because their environment's so whack. Their plant is like confused all the time. You know what I mean? It can't decide what fucking season it is when the temperatures swing from 80 degrees to fucking 60 degrees to fucking 40 degrees to fucking 100% humidity to 0% humidity. You know what I'm saying? You need something controlled. This is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money by checking your pre-existing conditions before you just go out and buy shit willy-nilly, okay? So the biggest thing with a light is, A, not all lights are created equal, okay? Like there'll be a lot of lights, especially like now that LEDs are kind of they're swung and like they're super popular. There'll be a lot of like Chinese companies.
Let's say China. And
just companies from different countries claiming they have like the same diodes and the same light source as some of these like well-established bigger companies like Grandmaster Grows, like Spider Farmer, like HLG, like Grower's Choice, you know what I mean? Like all those trusted like high-end companies that have been around for a second and like prove themselves, people trying to rip them off and they do a very poor job in it. So for me personally, I suggest not skimping out on a light. And here is the reason why. If you get a light and say hypothetically it's $600, you know what I mean? That's a pricey investment. A, after your first grow, if you grow it properly, you should pull between a pound to 2 pounds in a 5x5 space, right? One light, you grow it, you fill your space out, you're feeding properly, your environmental conditions are good, you know, you do good on the run. Low end should be a pound. High end, if you're killing it, should be 2. So hypothetically now, you spent $600 on a light and you get a pound back that you don't have to buy. If you're a smoker, you know what I mean? Instantly, depending on the quality of weed that you smoke, you know, I would say that probably saved you anywhere from like $1,000 to like $3,200. You know what I mean? So that's pretty fucking cool, like right off the bat. Additionally, say you try growing for 2 grow cycles. You have a nice light that you bought for $600, $800, whatever. And then you decide, I don't want to grow. Keep your box and your light, bro. You know what I mean? Keep your light nice. Put it back in the box. Explain your situation to people you're selling it to. Yo, this has only had 2 cycles. Be honest about it. and then sell it and get most of your money back. You know what I mean? Like, lights are gonna hold value as long as you don't beat them the fuck up or you haven't ran them for like 6 years. So I wouldn't be too worried about the initial investment of a light if you're really serious about growing. So what you're gonna want when you're growing is a full spectrum LED grow light. Yes, you can use HPS. Yes, you can use some kind of fluorescence and like all that shit too. The most effective thing from my experience I've found, especially in a tent scenario, is gonna be a bar style LED light. So when you're shopping for this bar style light, you know, make sure you're getting a trusted brand, and then make sure you're checking the flowering footprint, okay? So what this means is it's gonna tell you the coverage of your light, right? So say you have a space, a tent that's 5 by 5, right? That means you're gonna need a light that's at least 5 by 5 for its flowering footprint if you wanna maximize your space's potential and your yields, okay? So in other words, if you have a 5 by 5 area and you have a light that's only shining 3 by 3, and that's the flowering footprint, then you're missing 2 feet. That is just not gonna yield properly. You will get, you know, bud from it, but it's gonna be lacking in development. Boom! Let's break down what we've done so far. We got our space. We decide the space we wanna grow in. We got our 10 by 10 bedroom, right? We have stuck our 5 by 5 tent in our 10 by 10 bedroom. We have found a light which footprint will match the size of our tent. We have got a temp gauge that will read the highs and lows of both RH and temp for a 24-hour period. We have an intake fan set up in our tent to circulate air to make sure our long room and our tent are a similar environment. And we have checked both the highs and lows of temps and humidity for a 24-hour period at least, with the lights on and the lights off, okay? This should all be documented. This should all be in your notes. This will help you know what to do next, okay? So if you haven't done that, take a moment, pause, get all your information, and then come back to me. The next thing you're gonna need, and this will really depend on your pre-existing conditions, is either a dehumidifier or a humidifier. And more times than not, from my experience, in flower, you're gonna need a dehu. And the reason being is you're on a 12-12 now, so plants are gonna be respiring more and transpiring more with the lights off. So that is ultimately gonna raise the humidity. And I'll break down a whole video of transpiration and respiration a different time. But this is just the basics for now, okay? What you need to know is with the lights off, plants are breathing more, the stomatas are open more, and moisture is being released from those plants. Release from those plants, okay? So this is why in flower, especially if you have a full tent, you're probably gonna need some kind of dehumidification device. The biggest thing I found when shopping for a dehu is you want a dehu, not necessarily with a pump, but a continuous run setting, okay? And if you don't know what that is, a dehu with a continuous run setting will oftentimes have the backside on the dehu, a little hose spot where you can attach either a garden hose and gravity feed it down into a bigger res, or gravity feed it down to some kind of drain, or it will have a smaller spot and it will come with a hose that you can attach and do a similar thing. This is important because when your plants are respiring a lot and they're letting out a lot of moisture, you're not gonna wanna be in your room 2 to 3 times a day dumping a dehu, you know what I mean? And if you don't do that and you don't have a continuous dehu where it's pulling moisture out and releasing the moisture somewhere, you're gonna have problems. So it's worth it to me to spend the $200, spend the $250 on a nice dehu that's gonna last you a minute, that's gonna have continuous drain. And not for nothing, but like even if you decide not to grow, a dehumidifier is a good thing to have around your house. You can stick it in the basement, you can stick it in a fucking musty attic, you know what I mean? There's always reasons to have a dehu around. So your dehu will be set up in your lung room, okay? And now you must know, certain pieces of equipment are also gonna raise the temp of your environment. A dehumidifier, for example, is gonna raise the temperature of the environment, okay? Now this is gonna be less of a problem because you're in a bigger space. This is why I like a lung room, right? You have your 10 by 10, that's the bigger space. You could vent cold air from outside in there to contain that space and really dial in what temperature you want it. You know, a lot of intake fans now, they have the ability where they have a temp gauge that run off it. You can stick it in your room and you can set on a controller, all right, I want my intake fan to pull air from outside into my lung room, you know, when the room gets to 80. And then when the room gets to 75, the fan's gonna kick off. So there's a lot of things you can do, a lot of cheap alternatives to, you know, containing an environment. So with your dehu, it's gonna be in your lung room, and you're really just gonna have to work and figure out, you know, what the ranges you're gonna have to set on the dehu are in order to achieve your ideal environment inside your tent, okay? And it shouldn't be too tricky, you know what I mean? More times than not, it's 5 RH percent increments, right? So you can set it for 50, or you can set it for 55, or you can set it for 45 or 40. That being said, just because you set your DHU on a certain RH, it doesn't necessarily mean that your inside space of your tent is going to be that RH. So you're really gonna have to base, you know, your ranges on your temperature gauge inside your tent. Another reason, really quick, why I prefer a long room over just growing in a tent is because this is going to mitigate light leaks, okay? And although this is a controversial topic and some people think light leaks don't matter, speaking from my experience, I have hermed out rooms, I have re-veg full rooms, I've seeded out full rooms, all because the smallest specks of light have been shining in my room during the dark period, okay? So this is something I try to mitigate, I try to eliminate before it can occur, you know what I mean? Otherwise you're gonna be mad as hell when you go plan out for 3 months, bro, and it turns out to be some booty cheeks because you fucking re-veg the whole room, you know what I'm saying? So let's break down another piece of equipment that you may need depending on your pre-existing conditions of your environment. A humidifier. More times than not, I found that depending on the stage of life your cannabis plants are in, you're gonna need a humidifier. Particularly in the germination and like early seedling stage, you're gonna want a higher temp and a higher humidity. And again, you can find, you know, ideal environment conditions based on that stage of life that cannabis plant is online by Googling VPD cannabis, okay? But a humidifier is not something I would break the bank. Like, dude, you can go to Rite Aid and buy a $20 humidifier. It doesn't gotta be nothing crazy. You know what I mean? You're in a 5x5 or something smaller. You don't need a lot of humidity to fill the space. That being said too, you can cut off your intake fan, pulling air out so much, you know what I mean? And kind of trap your humidity, trap your heat in your tent in the early stages of cannabis's life or the veg stages, you know? So I wouldn't go out and buy a fucking $100 humidifier. I don't think it's worth it. The ultrasonic ones are kind of cool if you really like to like watch fucking humidity get shot out the fucking pipe, you know what I mean? But it's not necessary. So to recap really quick, we got us a long room, we got us a tent, we got us an intake fan that's circulating the air from the long room into the tent, right? We got us a light, we've checked the highs and lows of both the RH and the temp with the lights on and the lights off. We got us a DHU if we need one, which most likely we will. We're gonna spend money on a DHU because those are important. We're gonna get one with continuous run setting. Doesn't have to have a pump, but it has to continuously run. And we're gonna have a humidifier for the early stage of cannabis's life, right? So what else could we possibly need? And when I say possibly, I'm not saying that you will need all these things. This is gonna be dependent on your environment, but I want you to know at the very worst, your environment's super fucking whack and you have to have all the equipment you need to control it. What will you need? That's what I want to provide you today. So then there's no misinformation, there's no surprises later on, okay? And again, this is a basic list, bro. This isn't gonna be like, you know, like some advanced setup where maybe you have an automated watering system and you don't have to get in there and physically hand water your plants. There's drip line setup. Like, we're not gonna get into all that, bro. We're not gonna get into CO2 and like pumping CO2 in your room. We're just gonna give you a basic setup that you can use and grow fire ass fucking weed, okay? So the next thing that you would possibly need, and again, like I'm saying, this is for the most extreme, worst conditions, right? The next thing you possibly need is an AC. So for me personally, window ACs are way cheaper than stand-up ACs. If you have the ability to be in a long room that has a window, you know, and especially in the winter, you're probably not gonna need an AC because you can vent, like I said before, with an intake fan, cold, clean air from outside in. You're not gonna really have too many pest problems. From talking to people and like my slight experience with venting cold air in the wintertime is just too cold for bugs to really like be active. A lot of them are dormant, you know, for the wintertime. So you can control your temp, at least bring it down a lot of times if you're in the winter in a cold climate just by venting air into your long room. But let's say hypothetically you're in the summer and we're swinging the opposite way around. We still want to grow, but now the environment is 90 degrees outside. So probably our long room is very hot. And then if you think, if we go even closer into that center where the tent is and the light is and all your plants are, that's going to be even hotter, right? So in these conditions, you may need an AC. And like I was saying before, a window AC is going to save you a lot of money when compared to a stand-up AC. Stand-up ACs are nice because from my experience, they do a very good job dehumidifying the air too, so it almost kills two birds with one stone, right? You don't have to have a separate AC and dehumidifier, which kind of work against each other because that dehu produces heat and that AC is trying to mitigate the heat. You know what I mean? But you have a window AC, you stick the window AC. Everyone's used one before. You're setting the ranges almost identical to what you were doing with your dehu. The ranges that you see on the AC aren't necessarily going to be the ranges that are in that tent. So you're going to want to make sure you're setting the ranges, you're checking the temperature in the tent, and you're getting it where you want it. Do this with the lights on, do this with the lights off, bro. So now, let's talk about another thing that possibly you could need. And this is really dependent on your space again. But say you're in an attic, right? And you're in the dead winter. Bro, and it's like on average 15 to 20 degrees outside. And I know New York doesn't often stay that cold, but shit, last couple weeks been cold as a bitch, let's face it. Right, so maybe your long room is sitting low. Maybe the environment, the temperature is like 55 degrees. You might need some kind of space heater, okay? And these, you also don't have to break the bank with. You can find good, cheap ones. But the more energy efficient ones are gonna be a little pricier. My favorite heater that I found is a greenhouse heater, okay? And there's various different brands for this. I wish I had one on deck I could show you right now. But it's probably like between $100 and $120. This will have a gauge attached to it that you can plug your heater into, and then you can set the temps. It's really nice. It seems very efficient. I'm never worried about spilling a little water on it or anything. So that's probably my favorite. That being said, if you're in a bedroom or something and you have central air set up, or you have the ability to control your indoor environment, you can probably use that. But no, either way, if you're adding heat into your grow, more times than not, that's going to dry out your environment, and you're going to probably have to combat it with possibly a bigger humidifier, okay? So now, to recap one more time, we got our long room, right? That's the space that we want to grow in. We're going to dedicate that whole thing to weed, okay? Then we got our tent set up in the long room. We got our ventilation, aka our intake fan, pulling air out of our tent. And I know I haven't touched on this yet, so let's touch on it now. The reason we want air pulling out of our tent is because air is always going to find a way back in a tent, right? Like, just because we're pulling air out of a tent doesn't mean we have reduced the oxygen levels in that tent. That's not how oxygen really works. This isn't an airtight seal. You know what I'm saying? But it will almost create a slight suction to your tent. And this is what we call negative air pressure, right? And the reason I like that is because any dust particles, any hairs that may be in your grow, anything of that sort will ultimately be sucked out or encouraged to be sucked out of your tent, opposed to pumping air into your tent and blowing it up like a balloon. All that dust, all that hair that's in the long room would just be shot in there. You know what I mean? And you're going to ultimately be making a dirtier, less sterile grow. So back to the recap. We got our light set up. We got our temp and humidity gauge where we know the highs and lows of a 24-hour period. We got our dehu. We got a possible AC. We got our humidifier for our early stages of our plants. And we got a heater if we need one. Okay? So to me, that is a pretty solid ass list of all the things you're gonna need to get started and control your environment. I know this video is kind of long, but I want to get as much information across as I could for all you new growers, you know what I mean? Because one of my life goals, dude, really is, and I don't know how many times I'm gonna say this, probably a million, bro. But I want everyone growing their own, dude. So much love to y'all, you know what I mean? Get at me with any questions below, and let's grow, baby.